Have you ever felt that something is wrong deep inside, even when everything on the surface appears fine? That no matter how much you try to grow, change, or succeed, something invisible seems to pull you back into old mistakes, emotional outbursts, or quiet self-destruction. According to Carl Jung, this is not just bad luck or personality flaws. It's the silent work of the shadow, the hidden side of your psyche that you've spent your life ignoring. The shadow is made up of everything you've rejected, denied, or suppressed within yourself. It holds your repressed emotions, hidden desires, childhood wounds, irrational fears, and traits you were told were unacceptable. As a child, you learned quickly what was allowed and what wasn't. Don't cry, be a good boy, don't stop being selfish, don't be angry. So you buried your sadness, your ambition, your rage, and your hunger to be seen, just to be accepted by the people around you. But these parts of you didn't disappear. They went underground, into the unconscious, and from there, they've never stopped acting. Jung called this hidden reservoir the shadow, and he warned, "What you do not bring to consciousness will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Most people think the past is behind them, but the shadow is the past, still alive inside you, shaping how you react, choose, love, and sabotage. It's the voice that whispers you're not good enough just when you're about to succeed. It's the envy that eats at you when others get what you secretly desire but have forbidden yourself to want. It's the rage that explodes over small things, the shame that keeps you quiet, the fear that holds you back from your own potential. The danger is not just that the shadow exists, but that you don't see it, because it works silently, subtly. You think you're in control, but the more you ignore the shadow, the more it takes the wheel. It shows up in projection, when you hate someone simply because they remind you of something inside yourself. It shows up in repeated patterns, falling into the same toxic relationships, making the same mistakes, telling yourself the same lies. The shadow isn't evil. It's not something to destroy. In fact, Jung believed the shadow contains the very parts of you that can make you whole. Your strength, your creativity, your honesty, your drive. But they've been buried under years of fear, shame, and social conditioning. To truly evolve, you must stop pretending these parts don't exist. The shadow can't be erased, but it can be integrated. That begins with awareness, with asking, what have I been afraid to see in myself? When you bring light to what was hidden, it loses its power over you. What was once destructive becomes transformational. Most people never do this work. They live under the illusion that their personality is complete, while their life is quietly ruled by unhealed wounds. But if you have the courage to turn inward, to face the shadow, you open the door to true freedom, not the freedom to escape life, but the power to finally live it on your own terms. When the shadow takes control, how it manifests in your life. The most unsettling thing about the shadow is not that it exists, but that it acts without your permission, silently shaping your life while you remain unaware. Carl Jung taught that the shadow doesn't knock on your door. It slips in quietly, distorting your emotions, sabotaging your goals, and influencing your relationships. You think you're making conscious decisions, but often you're being steered by repressed aspects of yourself that you refuse to acknowledge. One of the most common ways the shadow reveals itself is through self-sabotage. Imagine working hard toward a goal, perhaps a relationship, a career milestone, or a personal transformation. And just when you're about to succeed, everything unravels. You procrastinate. You make impulsive decisions. You walk away, then convince yourself it just wasn't meant to be. This isn't random. Deep down, there may be a belief that you don't deserve success or a fear of what might happen if you truly step out of your comfort zone. The shadow, filled with old wounds and limiting narratives, pulls you back. Not because it wants to hurt you, but because it wants to protect the illusion of safety you've built through avoidance. Another powerful manifestation is projection. When you react strongly to someone, for example, feeling irrational anger toward a confident coworker or disdain for someone who seeks attention, pause and ask yourself, why does this person bother me so much? The shadow often makes you hate in others what you've rejected in yourself. If you were taught that ambition is arrogance, you may despise ambitious people. If you've repressed your own assertiveness, you may feel attacked by direct or bold individuals. You're not reacting to them. You're reacting to a part of yourself reflected back at you. The shadow also plays a central role in relationship dynamics. Ever noticed how some people always end up in toxic relationships despite their best intentions? This isn't bad luck, it's unconscious attraction. If your shadow holds unresolved feelings of rejection, you may be drawn to partners who reinforce that same pain. If you carry a repressed fear of abandonment, you might chase people who are emotionally unavailable. These patterns repeat not because you want them, but because part of you recognizes them as familiar, even if they're destructive. Even more insidious is the fear of judgment, rooted in shadow shame. If you avoid speaking up, fear looking foolish, or constantly seek validation, your shadow may be filled with early memories where being seen equaled being rejected. You learn to hide, to please, to silence your truth in order to be loved. But over time, this survival strategy turns into a prison, one where your true voice is never heard. Perhaps the most painful sign of all is the persistent sense of emptiness. You may have friends, a job, even outward success, but something always feels missing. That void isn't because something external is wrong. It's because essential parts of you, your passion, your anger, your authenticity, have been buried. You amputated those parts to become acceptable, but now you feel incomplete. All of this shows that the shadow isn't some distant psychological theory. It's alive in your choices, your emotions, your patterns. And until you bring it into the light, it will continue to run the show behind the scenes. As Jung warned, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. The question is, are you willing to see it? You might think that burying your darkest thoughts, your most uncomfortable emotions, or your unacceptable desires will make them disappear. That if you ignore what's hidden long enough, it will eventually dissolve. But the truth, as Carl Jung emphasized, is far more unsettling. What you suppress doesn't vanish, it gathers strength. The more you ignore your shadow, the more it finds destructive ways to express itself. One of the most dangerous consequences of ignoring your shadow is that it begins to leak through the cracks of your personality. You may appear composed, kind, even successful on the outside, but suddenly erupt in uncontrolled rage over something trivial. You may develop anxiety, panic attacks, or unexplained physical symptoms that medicine struggles to treat. These aren't random. They are the repressed emotions of your shadow screaming for release. Your body and psyche can no longer contain what has been buried for too long. Your shadow also shapes your external reality in painful ways. If you've denied your fear of abandonment, you might cling to toxic relationships just to avoid the pain of being alone. If you've rejected your own ambition as selfish or shameful, you may constantly sabotage your career, convincing yourself that you're not the type for success. When you bury desire, you don't become free. You become silently frustrated, never fully understanding why life feels so hollow. Left unchecked, the shadow becomes not just a psychological threat, but a full-blown identity crisis. Over time, you may begin to feel like a stranger inside your own life, disconnected from your passions, your values, even your sense of self. This is known as depersonalization, a haunting feeling that you're merely performing life, not living it. And it happens because in your attempt to eliminate your darkness, you also amputate parts of your soul. You try to be only light, only kind, only good. But no human being is just one side of the spectrum. Worse still, the shadow doesn't only harm you. When repressed long enough, it spills outward, damaging your relationships, eroding your trust in others, and perpetuating cycles of hurt. People who have lived in denial often become bitter, defensive, cynical. They blame others for everything that goes wrong. They explode at the ones they love. They carry resentment like armor and cannot see that it's their own unhealed pain running the show. And then there is the final subtle danger. You convince yourself that this is just who you are. You start to believe the story your shadow has written. I've always been anxious. I'm just unlucky in love. I'll never be good enough. But these are not truths. They are symptoms of unresolved inner conflict. You don't see that you've been living under the influence of a hidden force, mistaking unconscious conditioning for personal destiny. Jung warned that if you do not bring the unconscious to light, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. This isn't just poetic, it's practical. Your shadow is already shaping your reality, whether you know it or not. The only question is whether you will face it or continue being controlled by it. Ultimately, ignoring your shadow is not harmless. It is a slow erosion of your authenticity, your relationships, your power, and your joy. You don't just lose touch with who you are. You begin to live as someone you're not. And in doing so, you miss the life that was meant for the real you. Once you recognize the presence of the shadow, this hidden force quietly shaping your decisions, reactions, and relationships, the next step is not to destroy it, but to integrate it. As Carl Jung taught, the shadow is not your enemy. It is a forgotten part of you, buried beneath shame, fear, and social conditioning. And it holds immense power, not only to harm you if ignored, but to transform you if embraced with honesty and courage. Integrating the shadow does not mean becoming dark or indulging in destructive impulses. It means looking at what you've denied with clear eyes and an open heart. It means no longer pretending that the parts of yourself you once labeled as bad or weak do not exist. Jung emphasized one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the foundation of healing, bringing light into the hidden places within you. The first step toward integration is awareness. Begin by observing your emotional reactions. When someone triggers you, when you feel irritated, angry, jealous, or ashamed, pause and ask, what is this really about? Often what you see in others is a mirror of what you've rejected in yourself. That arrogance that annoys you might reflect your repressed desire to be confident. That attention seeker you dislike might be showing you your buried need to be seen. These triggers are not accidents. They are invitations to explore what lies beneath the surface. The second step is acceptance. You must allow yourself to feel what has long been denied. If you've buried anger, sadness, or desire, bring it into the light. Not through impulsive action, but through honest reflection. Sit with your feelings. Name them. Yes, I feel rage. Yes, I feel envy. Yes, I want more than I've allowed myself to admit. The moment you stop fighting your emotions, they begin to lose their unconscious grip. The shadow feeds on denial, but it softens in the face of truth. One powerful tool for this work is reflective writing. Take time to journal honestly. Ask yourself, what part of myself do I judge most? What do I criticize in others that I secretly relate to? What do I fear others might discover about me? Let the answers come without censorship. When you write your shadow into words, you give it shape, and once it is seen, it can be transformed. Another transformative method is inner dialogue. Jung encouraged people to speak with their shadow as if it were a separate figure. Close your eyes, imagine this hidden part of you. What does it look like? What does it need? What has it been trying to say all these years? You may be surprised to find that it's not a monster, but a wounded child, a forgotten dream, or a silenced truth, longing not to destroy you, but to be heard and reintegrated. Above all, integration is a journey, not a one-time event. You will face discomfort. You will confront parts of yourself you wish weren't there. But with each act of awareness, each moment of radical honesty, you take back your power. What was once destructive becomes usable energy. Anger turns into assertiveness. Fear becomes caution and wisdom. Desire fuels creativity and ambition. The ultimate goal is not perfection, but wholeness. To live not just as a persona, a mask to please the world, but as a complete being rooted in truth. When you integrate your shadow, you stop being a prisoner of your past. You become conscious. And from that place, you begin to live a life that is not ruled by fear or reaction, but by self-awareness, strength, and inner freedom. If healing the shadow can unlock so much power, wisdom, and freedom, why do so few people ever attempt it? Why do most continue to repeat the same emotional cycles, make the same mistakes, and live under the weight of unconscious patterns? The truth is simple but uncomfortable. Facing the shadow is one of the hardest things a human being can do. It requires deep honesty, emotional courage, and the willingness to shatter the illusions you've spent your entire life building. Most people would rather stay asleep than wake up to painful truths. From an early age, we are taught who we're supposed to be, how to behave, what to feel, and what to suppress. We build an identity not based on who we really are, but on what makes us acceptable, likable, and safe. This identity, this persona, becomes a mask. Behind it, the shadow forms quietly. But taking that mask off means risking rejection, admitting past wounds, and confronting the parts of ourselves that we've spent years trying to hide. That's not something most are ready to do. There is also a deep emotional cost. To face the shadow means revisiting memories you've buried, reliving feelings you've numbed, and acknowledging pain you've spent decades avoiding. It means realizing that many of your problems are not caused by others, but by your own unhealed psyche. It's far easier to blame the world than to take radical responsibility for your inner state. Easier to say life is unfair than to admit that your fear of rejection, your suppressed anger, or your need for validation is what's keeping you stuck. Society itself rewards avoidance. We live in a culture that encourages distraction over introspection, productivity over presence, and appearance over authenticity. You're told to stay positive, move on, get over it, and focus on success, but rarely to pause, reflect, or confront your inner world. Emotional depth is often misunderstood as weakness, and so we build lives on top of unresolved pain, performing competence while secretly falling apart inside. There's also the illusion of control. When you avoid your shadow, you get to pretend you have it all together. You can hide behind your achievements, your relationships, even your spirituality. But underneath it all, you're still being run by the very emotions you claim to have transcended. True inner work demands that you drop the performance, confront your contradictions, and let go of the comforting stories you've told yourself about who you are. And yet, the greatest irony is this: by trying to avoid discomfort, you invite greater suffering. What you run from only grows stronger. The shadow doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It becomes louder, more chaotic, more destructive. It shows up in your relationships, in your health, in your sense of meaninglessness. You think you've buried it, but in reality, it's running the show from the background. Carl Jung knew this well. That's why he said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And he was right. People change their jobs and relationships, move cities, adopt spiritual bypasses, all in an effort to escape the one thing they cannot run from: themselves. But if you're willing to do the work, if you dare to look within, you become part of the rare few who stop living reactively and start living consciously. Integrating the shadow isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness, though difficult to achieve, is what brings lasting peace. The kind that no mask, no distraction, and no false identity can ever offer. By now, you've walked through the depths of the shadow. You've seen how it forms, from childhood conditioning and repressed emotion. You've understood how it manifests, through projection, sabotage, fear, and painful patterns. You've witnessed the consequences of ignoring it, and you've glimpsed the path toward integration and healing. And now you arrive at the most important point in this entire journey. What will you do with this truth? This is the question that separates those who transform from those who stay stuck. Because knowing about the shadow is not enough. Insight without action changes nothing. You can read 100 books, watch 1,000 videos, talk endlessly about trauma and self-awareness. But if you don't turn inward and do the uncomfortable work, your life will continue to be shaped by forces you refuse to face. And here's the hard truth. Most people won't do this work. They will go back to their routines, back to blaming others, back to numbing themselves with distraction, entertainment, and productivity. They will hear the truth but quickly bury it under convenience. Because staying asleep is easier than waking up, and the ego always chooses what is familiar, even if it's painful, over what is true. They will continue living under the illusion that life is happening to them, that fate is cruel, that success and peace belong to others but not to them. They will avoid the mirror, avoid the silence, avoid the reckoning, and in doing so, they will unknowingly give their power away to the very forces that keep them small, reactive, and unfulfilled. But if you've made it this far, if you've read this with your heart open, if something inside you stirred, if you recognized even a fragment of your own shadow in these words, then you are already different. Because awareness is the beginning of transformation. You can no longer pretend you don't know. The illusions have been pierced, and now you stand at the edge of a decision that only you can make. Will you continue living as a fraction of yourself? Or will you gather the courage to face what you've spent a lifetime avoiding? This path is not glamorous. It will not always feel good. You will confront memories that make you ache. You will feel anger you thought was long gone, fear you thought you'd buried, desires you once called shameful. But in that confrontation lies your rebirth. Because what you've called weakness is often unclaimed strength. What you've feared is often untapped wisdom. And what you've denied may be the very thing that makes you whole. The shadow does not disappear overnight. It is a lifelong process. But every time you pause and reflect instead of reacting, every time you choose awareness over blame, every time you sit with discomfort instead of running, you reclaim a piece of yourself, and eventually, what once haunted you becomes your greatest ally. Carl Jung didn't promise that this path would be easy, but he knew it was necessary. As he said, no, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that is the invitation before you now. Not just to survive, not just to function, but to become real, integrated, whole. So ask yourself, what part of me have I been denying? What patterns keep repeating? What am I finally ready to face? Because this moment, right here, right now, is not just a conclusion. It's a beginning. In later life, many believe they already know who they are. But deep within, there may still be unhealed pain, old anger, hidden fears, silent shame, buried long ago and quietly shaping how we feel, react, and relate to others. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the part of ourselves we rejected to be accepted by others. Over the years, we've learned to wear a mask to fit in, but in doing so, we lost touch with parts of our true self. That inner emptiness, the repeating emotional patterns, and the quiet dissatisfaction are often signals from the shadow asking to be seen. The deeper message here is this. Healing does not mean getting rid of the shadow, it means gently turning toward it, listening, and integrating it as part of who you are. No matter your age, it's never too late to reconnect with your inner truth. By facing what you've long avoided, you release yourself from emotional burdens you didn't even realize you were carrying. And in doing so, you open the door to a new chapter of life, one marked by peace, authenticity, and quiet strength.